growing up, at least as far back as I could remember, I always wanted to create music. My parents have these home videos of me where, as a kid, before I could even speak, I would grab my dad's guitar, jump up on the coffee table, and start playing a show right there in the middle of the living room for my family. And instead of playing cops and robbers or games like that as children, I would get my sister and my two cousins, and we would form a band. We would spread these newspapers and magazines all over the floor to create a stage for us to play on. And then we'd use whatever noise-making devices we could find to make some music. A kid's toy piano maybe, pots and pans as drums, or sometimes we would just scream at the top of our lungs because we thought that's what rock stars did. And I'm sure my parents loved it. Well, at the age of 10, things got serious. That's when I got my first electric bass and I started taking lessons. I loved the instrument and I dedicated countless hours to it. Sometimes my parents would find me asleep with it, holding it in bed. I wanted to change the world through music. I wanted to rock out. Now, during the same time period, I also wanted to do something for those who are suffering in our world. So I used to beg my parents for change so that I could give it to the homeless waiting at intersections. And I spent all of my breaks during school volunteering for nonprofits that were helping developing nations. In other words, when I wasn't working towards a world where I was on stage sharing my music, I was working towards one with a little less suffering in the world. I didn't realize there was a connection between these two things until much later in life, though. So fast forward to 2004, where I moved to Portland, Oregon as a musician. When I moved, I left everything and everyone behind, including the family, friends, and culture that I grew up with. I started missing some of it, so I would import these movies from Hong Kong on eBay, just so I can hear a bit of my language and see a bit of my culture on screen. Well, 2 months after I moved, the movie Kill Bill came out on DVD. And all of my friends were telling me to watch it. So they're like, you're into these martial arts movies, you should definitely check out this film. I bought it the day it came out since I missed it in theaters. Now, in this movie, there's this iconic scene where a woman named Oren Ishii walks into this restaurant with her gang of crazy 88s. It was the Yakuza, or the Asian mafia that she had led. Now, for most people, this is just another trademark Quentin Tarantino scene where people are just walking in. Some might remember the music that was playing because it was used in a couple of other films, and some might remember a parallel scene in Reservoir Dogs. But for me, it was much different. You see, for me, it was this powerful epiphany because it was the first time that I had ever seen an American-produced major film that depicted Asians as cool, confident, and sexy. I mean, think about it. Imagine growing up your entire life and never having seen anything in mainstream culture that could reflect your own identity in that way. Then I started thinking about the void in my own art and music. So the music industry, the gatekeepers for the art that I lived and breathed since my very first memories, didn't really allow people that looked like me in. I mean, despite having over 17 million Asian Americans in this country, we have almost no representation in terms of music magazines, what's playing on the radio, or even what was on MTV back when they used to play music videos. It was that night in the middle of the film that I believed that things would have to change. And so, right there in the middle of the film, an idea for an Asian American band was born. I decided to call it the Slants. It was a reference to our perspective in life as people of color, as geeks, and as musicians. And when I first started, it wasn't supposed to be some kind of social, political project. In fact, we just wanted to share some of our culture and make it about representation. But within a few months of starting this project, just when we announced it on MySpace, actually, we got these messages. Asian American kids started writing emails and letters to us saying, thank you for existing. Thank you for showing me that this is possible. Thank you for giving me a reason to be proud of my heritage. I realized that we had a lot more of a responsibility at that point, that we needed to do something, and actually, since we're being upheld, that we need to be responsible for the kinds of words we were saying. I didn't realize, though, that how quickly it would be before we would start being judged simply because of our race. Newspapers started writing articles about us. saying that we were turning stereotypes upside down. But not everybody agreed. The music editor at a local paper wrote a review slamming us for our ethnicity, saying, "OMG, I get it, the Slants are Asian, but what's so impressive about a bunch of Asian kids that play keyboards?" Then I got a record label deal once, an offer from a major label, a dream come true for any musician, but it came with a condition. They wanted me to replace my lead singer with somebody who was white, because they told me Asian doesn't sell. I heard similar things time and time again. As I was booking shows across the country, venues would say, "I love your music, I think what you're doing is great, but who would want to go and see an Asian band?" When we combined these experiences with what we were seeing in the communities out there, the injustices that were happening all across America, we decided that we couldn't just sit on the sidelines anymore. We needed to integrate our social justice values with our music. So we started getting involved with Asian American advocacy organizations. We raised money for causes that we believed in, and we started leading discussions on race and identity across North America. Then, in 2009, our attorney recommended that we file an application for a registration for our band's trademark. The government denied this request. They said that our name, the Slants, is disparaging to persons of Asian descent, even though we are all Asian and we are doing anti-racism work on behalf of the government. To come up with this particular decision, they used my ethnicity. They said if people see pictures of Asians on your website and they see the name the Slants, they're going to automatically think of this racial slur and not any other definition in the dictionary. What they were basically was saying, anyone can trademark the Slants as long as they're not Asian. You guys are too Asian. But here's the real joke, that out of over 800 applications for the term slant, the only one ever denied in all of US history is for mine, a band of all Asians trying to take back the term. Our court case has worked its way for the last 5.5 years through the federal system. I just got back from Washington, D.C. about a month ago, coming before a federal circuit panel, and many believe that it's going to end up at the Supreme Court. This particular story was one that I started sharing across media outlets throughout the world. And soon, our story, our battle for free speech, was featured in almost every newspaper and magazine and radio station and TV station across this country. It was great to get so much more attention on our music and our work and justice. But then the comments started pouring in. I found myself just living under a microscope. My intentions were constantly being questioned. People would take quotes that I said in interviews out of context and spread false stories of controversy about me and the band. And along the way, I had to deal with excessive turnover too. Members of my band decided it wasn't worth the fight anymore, that they just wanted to play music and worry about other things. I had to deal with things like figuring out if I wanted to spend the little money we had to pay court fees or to pay for repairing my tour bus. Make decisions like thinking, is it even worth it? How important is fighting a court case to a band when you can't spend your money, time, or energy playing music? Then in July of 2015, I was dealt another blow. The National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, or NAPABA, an organization who had been supporting us for the past 5 years, filed a legal brief against my band. As I read their brief, it was like every word felt like a little dagger just twisting into my back. They had statements like this, that Mr. Tam cannot wield his First Amendment rights as a sword to compel the government to aid him in spreading racial epithets to every concert hall and record store in this nation, or to enrich him in the process. This kind of stuff repeated in my head over and over again. And rather than asking for culturally competent laws from our government, they instead decided to call me and the work of my band racist no less than 13 times. As I sat there and thought about what this brief meant, why they would even file it to begin with. I was tormented with anger, doubt, fear. To me, what they did felt worse. It hurt more than the kicks to my belly that I received as a kid for being Asian. It hurt worse than the scar that I still have on the top of my head as I was being pummeled with rocks, as people called me a Jap and a gook. It was more degrading to me than having a major record label ask me to replace my singer with somebody who's white, because this was from my own community, people who were supposed to understand me, people who supposedly shared my same values. And this is despite the fact that many of their members, including their own president, telling me how they were big fans of our social justice work. I spoke at their national conference just a few months before this brief was even filed. So I kept wondering why they would do this. And I kept wondering, is it even worth it anymore? Am I making a difference? But then, the notes of encouragement started piling in. Members of Nepalba protested that decision. Artists and activists, nonprofits, and small business owners wrote me letters thanking me for doing this, saying things like, "Thank you for fighting against this form of systemic racism." Because, it's quite ironic that in the name of protecting me against racism, the government is denying me rights based on my race. Other people said, "Thank you for fighting for the right for self-identity and empowerment," something that our government has been horrible at when dealing with communities of color or other marginalized groups. People who believe that reappropriation could be a powerful tool for creating social change said thank you. But some of my favorite thoughts were the most simple. You rock. Against this rising tide of gossip, betrayal, and false accusations, I hung on to each of these notes of encouragement like a life raft. But when fused with a vision for a better and more equitable world, this became my foundation. What a coincidence that many of the same newspapers and magazines that I laid down as a kid became platforms for me to share works of social justice as an adult. It's too easy to get caught up in the negativity and the doubt and the haters out there. We need to find these notes of encouragement wherever we can. For the past decade, I felt like I was going back and forth between two extremes. Am I an artist or am I an activist? Am I an artist or an activist? Am I too busy being an activist to be an artist? And so on. But then I realized they aren't necessarily opposing things. At its most basic level, art involves intentionality and creativity from the artist. Art is simply a reflection of the artist on the world. So while mediums and methods might differ, it's not that different from artists. Many of us begin with the kind of world that we would like to see. And as my friend Walida Imaresha says, we get too busy getting caught up with what we think of as possible. We should instead learn from artists and begin with the kind of world we want to see, then work out the steps to get there. Excuse me. Those bits of encouragement might only be this gossamer thread, but when you fuse it to your own vision and your own values, it can become a foundation in which we can move forward. So, whether it is the backbeat of drums or the marching of protesters, I hope you know that art and activism, that's what drives change in our world. And that is music to my ears. Thank you.